Hello and welcome to another playbook. Today we are going to talk about career decisions and how should one make them. And I'm going to share a framework that I've used quite effectively, I hope. I think in making my own career choices, in making my own career decisions. And I call this framework bracketed problems. It's about looking at career choices and career decisions as bracketed problems. So let's jump in. First, let's figure out what essentially are bracketed problems, right? The first part is that bracketed problems, as their name suggests, are bound in nature and they are time bound in the order of years, right? So, if you decide to do a PhD, for example, in engineering or in science, it's typically a 4 to 6 year commitment, right? So it is time bound. Now, if you're going to take 9 years or 10 years to finish your PhD, then you're definitely going out of bounds, right? So the first thing in a bracketed problem is that it is time bound in the order of years, right? But it is time bound and you have to define the bound before you start work on such a problem. Second, it has a very clear beginning and a very clear end. So it is bookended in that way, right? You know what you're starting out with and you know what you want to end with, which brings us to the third point, that there is a very clear definition of what success looks like and what failure looks like. Now, it could be any metric that you use to define success or failure, but in your mind, you're very clear that at the end of X number of years, I would have been able to do A, B, C. So your definition of what success is very, very clear. And the inverse of that, you clearly know what failure looks like. If I'm not able to do A, if I'm not able to do B, if I'm not able to do C, then it is a failure. If all of these three things don't happen within 3 years, for example. Now, what this does is it gives us permission to ourselves. It helps us give permission to self to analyze the outcome and take next steps. When you look at life's choices and especially career choices as bracketed problems, at the end of that period, if you started out by clearly defining the number of years, clearly defining the beginning and the end, clearly defining what success looks like, at the end of that period, you can actually analyze. You give yourself permission to see, did I succeed? Did I fail? By how much I failed, right? Have I reached the end of that bound problem? And you give yourself permission to think about the next bracketed problem. It is very effective in making career choices because it helps you decide whether to stay, whether to go work on a different problem, or actually spend more time on the existing problem. Because essentially there are three outcomes that can happen. One is there is clear failure. There's, you have absolutely failed, right? And that's okay. You give yourself permission to think that, okay, I started out by saying if I take up this particular job, I give myself 2 years to get it from stage A to stage B, right? From, helping it reach from, it's a new product and I will help it get to 10 million monthly active users by the end of 2 years. The end of 2 years, you barely scratched 500,000 monthly active users and your competitors are racing away with it. It's a clear failure. It's not that you incorrectly defined the market because other people have been able to capture the market. It's the fact that you didn't build a product which was good enough and which was able to capture the market. So it's a clear failure. Or the outcome is it's a clear success. You wanted to get to 10 million monthly active users in the first 2 years of building a new product. You are at 12 million monthly active users. In fact, you might be at 20 million monthly active users. It's a clear success. Right? It's a clear success given that you are the market leader, you identified the market correctly, you achieved product market fit, and you got yourselves to a target that you had set. But then there's a third outcome, which is middling results. What if you're at 6.5 million MAU and the market has grown? You're sure that you've found product market fit, but you have not hit the benchmark that you wanted to. At all these three outcomes, right? Because you had clearly defined that, hey, within 2 years, I want to reach this particular stage. This is the beginning. This is how I'll build the product. This is the end. As in, by this stage, I would have reached this particular benchmark, this particular milestone. At the end of those 2 years, you give yourself permission to analyze and see where you are. Is it an abject failure? Is it a roaring success, or are these middling results? Whatever may be the outcome, if it's a complete failure, you can say, okay, I think I should stop now and I should look for my next problem because I don't think I'm going to succeed with this. If it's a great success, you can again say, okay, should I set my sight at the next target? Now I want to get to 100 million MAU in the next 2 years. And you can go after that. Or you can say, you know what? I like building new things. I like that 0 to 1 journey. I like thinking about things from before they've found product market fit to when they achieve product market fit. So I'm going to go and work on something new. But third, if it's middling results, again, you can say, okay, you know what? I think if I work hard and, if we keep working at this problem for another 6 months, we'll be able to get to 10 million. And I think I want to work a little bit more on this. Or the reverse. I think we'll get to 10 million MAU, right? We didn't get to it because of a number of reasons, but I don't consider this a complete failure. And I still give myself permission to go think of something else. So the whole point of bracketed problems is that human beings suffer from sunk cost fallacy. Right? When we spend a lot of time and effort into any project, into any part of our life, it is very difficult for us to walk away from it, or to, in fact, sometimes even invest more time in it. We keep saying, putting good money behind bad money, or putting more time on a project which is not working out. But you know what? By this level of analysis, you can actually give yourself permission to either work more on it, right? And say that, okay, I'm going to start a new bracketed problem and I give myself another 2 years to work on this. Or you walk away from it saying, hey, I think my time with this particular problem is done and I would like to move on and work on the next problem. This is why I consider bracketed problems to be a very strong framework to think about career choices, because I see a lot of times people stay in the same job for a very long time and their successes came in the past and they are now in a phase where new successes are not happening. Right? Because they are not actually defining what next success looks like. But the other way around also, people keep working on a problem for a very long time where, it's clearly an abject failure and the chances of pivoting and getting it right are small. And I'm not saying that you should not keep working on them, but there is a time to wash your hands off something. And there's a time to say that, hey, this is sunk cost. I've spent a lot of effort, but I don't think this is going anywhere. I've either identified the wrong product or I've identified the wrong market, right? As usual, I will give a bunch of caveats because no framework is applicable in all circumstances and in all situations. So based on your situation, based on what you're thinking about your career, this might be a really good tool for you to use, and this might be just a terrible tool for you to use. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where you should not be using this framework. Don't use this framework if you're planning to do a startup. If you're starting up, this is not the framework for you. Sure, you should define success and failure, and sure, you should set yourself some time-bound benchmarks. But usually, startups are unbound problems, right? By their very nature, startups require you to think much bigger, but deal with ambiguity. And this brings me to the second point. Whenever you're entering any extremely high-risk, high-reward scenario, which by their very nature are ambiguous, you don't even know what the beginning is. You don't know what the end is. The end could be a 10x outcome. The end could be a 1000x outcome. And you don't know what success looks like. You, in fact, sometimes don't even know what failure looks like, because in the short term, what could be a failure might eventually turn out to be a big success. So in scenarios like this, using a bracketed problems approach is not a good thing. Bracketed problem approaches are better when you're applying them to scenarios which have some level of risk and some level of reward, but are not particularly extreme high risk, extreme high reward scenarios. And whenever the success or the failure definition is not clear to you, don't apply this framework. This framework does require the problem to be bound by time, and the problem to be bound by very clear beginning and end, and the problem to be bound by a very clear definition of success and failure. If you're not able to define it, that means there's something fundamentally ambiguous about the situation. So don't apply this framework. Think in a different way. Don't take this as an excuse to be a mercenary. It's not about jumping from one job to the next. It's not about jumping from one problem statement to the next without actually doing justice to any of the problem statements. You still have to be deeply committed and involved in the problem that you're trying to solve. This is about giving yourself permission to think beyond the problem once your time bound area has ended, once you know that your time has lapsed, you give yourself permission to think about the next thing or think more about this in an objective manner. And I think that bit is critical. It's about giving permission to self. It is not about being a mercenary and jumping from problem to problem, which it brings me to my very last point. This is not an excuse to fail. A lot of people go from failure to failure to failure, right? And again, I know we could spend hours discussing what is the definition of failure, but in this scenario, in this framework, we are very clearly defining what is success and what is failure, right? This is not an excuse to fail. What that means is that don't use this to give up. If your time has passed and you've still failed, it's very likely that you've learned something very valuable about what you were doing. And you can define a much better next bounded problem and say that, you know what, I think given one more year, now I have the tools and now I have the things that I require to actually make this a success. I've learned the hard lessons. So don't use the bracketed problem statement as a way to saying, I'm going to go from one failure to the next. And then you look at a long enough career and you realize that, hey, what are the wins under your belt? And you walk away after 10, 15, 20 years with minimal wins or in fact no wins under your belt. So don't do that, right? So I hope this framework made sense to all of you. Please leave your questions. Let me know if more information would be useful. And see you back here for the next playbook. Do subscribe to the channel and enjoy.